He suddenly remembered lying in bed the night before, lying there, and suddenly he had been contemplating the murder of his wife. In that instant, kneeling there, everything came clear to him. It was not just Danny the Overlook was working on, it was working on him too. It wasn't Danny who was the weak link, it was him. He was the vulnerable one, the one who could be bent and twisted until something snapped. Until I let go and sleep, and when I do that, if I do that. He looked up at the banks of the window, and the sun threw back an almost blinding glare from their many-paned surfaces, but he looked anyway. For the first time, he noticed how much they seemed like eyes. They reflected away the sun and held their own darkness within. It was not Danny they were looking at, it was him. In those few seconds, he understood everything. There was a certain black and white picture he remembered seeing as a child in catechism class. The nun had presented it to them on an easel and called it a miracle of God. The class had looked at it blankly, seeing nothing but a jumble of whites and blacks, senseless and patternless. Then one of the children in the third row had gasped, "It's Jesus!" And that child had gone home with a brand new testament and also a calendar, because he had been the first. The others stared even harder, Jackie Torrance among them. One by one, the other kids had given a similar gasp, one little girl transported in near ecstasy, crying out shrilly, "I see him, I see him." She had also been rewarded with the testament. At last, everyone had seen the face of Jesus in the jumble of blacks and whites, except Jackie. He strained harder and harder, scared now, part of him cynically thinking that everyone else was simply putting on to please Sister Beatrice, part of him secretly convinced that he wasn't seeing it because God had decided he was the worst sinner in the class. "Don't you see it, Jackie?" Sister Beatrice had asked him in a sad, sweet manner. "I see your tits," he had thought in a vicious desperation. He began to shake his head, then faked excitement and said, "Yes, I do. Wow, it is Jesus." And everyone in class had laughed and applauded him, making him feel triumphant, ashamed, and scared. Later, when everyone else had tumbled their way up from the church basement and out onto the street, he had lingered behind, looking at the meaningless black and white jumble that Sister Beatrice had left on the easel. He hated it. They had all made it up the way he had, even Sister herself. It was a big fake. "Shitfire, hellfire, shitfire," he had whispered under his breath, and as he turned to go, he had seen the face of Jesus from the corner of his eye, sad and wise. He turned back, his heart in his throat. Everything had suddenly clicked into place, and he had stared at the picture with fearful wonder, unable to believe he had missed it. The eyes, the zigzag of shadows across the careworn brow, the fine nose, the compassionate lips, looking at Jackie Torrance. What had only been a meaningless sprawl had suddenly been transformed into a stark black and white etching of the face of Christ our Lord. Fearful wonder became terror. He had cussed in front of a picture of Jesus. He would be damned. He would be in hell with the sinners. The face of Christ had been in the picture all along, all along. Now kneeling in the sun and watching his son playing in the shadow of the hotel, he knew that it was all true. The hotel wanted Danny. Maybe all of them, but Danny for sure. The Hedges had really walked. There was a dead woman in 217, a woman that was perhaps only a spirit and harmless under most circumstances, but a woman who was now in active danger. Like some malevolent clockwork toy, she had been wound up and set in motion by Danny's own odd mind, his own. Had it been Watson who had told him a man had dropped dead of a stroke one day on the Rote Court? Or had it been Ullman? It didn't matter. There had been an assassination on the 3rd floor. How many old quarrels, suicides, strokes? How many murders? Was Grady lurking somewhere in the west wing with his axe, just waiting for Danny to start him up so he could come back out of the woodwork? The puffed circle of bruises around Danny's neck, the twinkling, half-seen bottles in the deserted lounge, the radio, the dreams, the scrapbook he had found in the cellar. "Medoc, are you here? I've been sleepwalking again, my dear." He got up suddenly, thrusting the snowshoes back out the door. He was shaking all over. He slammed the door and picked up the box with the battery in it. It slipped through his shaking fingers. "Oh Christ, what if I cracked it?" and thumped over on its side. He pulled the flaps of the carton open and yanked the battery out, heedless of the acid that might be leaking through the battery's casing if it had cracked. But it hadn't. It was whole. A little sigh escaped his lips. Cradling it, he took it over to the Ski-Doo and put it on its platform near the front of the engine. He found a small adjustable wrench on one of the shelves and attached the battery cables quickly and with no trouble. The battery was live, no need to use the charger on it. There had been a crackle of electricity and a small odor of ozone when he slipped the positive cable onto its terminal. The job done, he stood away, wiping his hands nervously on his faded denim jacket. There. It should work. No reason why not. No reason at all except that it was part of the Overlook and the Overlook really didn't want them out of here. Not at all. The Overlook was having one hell of a good time. There was a little boy to terrorize, a man and his woman to set one against the other, and if it played its cards right, they could end up flitting through the Overlook's halls like insubstantial shades in a Shirley Jackson novel. Whatever walked in Hill House walked alone. But you wouldn't be alone in the Overlook. Oh no. There would be plenty of company here. But there was really no reason why the snowmobile shouldn't start. Except he still didn't really want to go. Yes, except for that. He stood looking at the Ski-Doo, his breath puffed out in frozen little plumes. He wanted it to be the way it had been. When he had come in here, he had no doubts. Going down would be the wrong decision. He had known that then. Wendy was only scared of the boogeyman summoned up by a single hysterical little boy. Now suddenly he could see her side. It was like his play, his damnable play. He no longer knew which side he was on, or how things should come out. Once you saw the face of God in those jumbled blacks and whites, it was everybody out of the pool. You could never unsee it. Others might laugh and say it's nothing, just a lot of splotches with no meaning. Give me a good old craft master paint by the numbers any day, but you would always see the face of Christ our Lord looking out at you. You had seen it in one gaslit leap, the conscious and unconscious melding in that one shocking moment of understanding. You would always see it. You were damned to always see it. I've been sleepwalking again, my dear. It had been all right until he had seen Danny playing in the snow. It was Danny's fault. Everything had been Danny's fault. He was the one with the shining, or whatever it was. It wasn't a shining, it was a curse. If he and Wendy had been here alone, they would have passed the winter quite nicely. No pain, no strain on the brain. Don't want to leave? Can't? The Overlook didn't want them to go, and he didn't want them to go either. Not even Danny. Maybe he was a part of it now. Perhaps the Overlook, large and rambling Samuel Johnson, that it was, had picked him up to be its Boswell. You say the new caretaker writes? Very good. Sign him on. Time we told our side. Let's get rid of the woman and his snot-nosed kid first, however. We don't want him to be distracted. We don't. He was standing by the snowmobile's cockpit. His head started to ache again. What did it come down to? Go or stay? Very simple. Keep it simple. Shall we go or shall we stay? If we go, how long will it be before you find the local hole in the Sidewinder? A voice inside him asked. The dark place with the lousy colored TV that unshaven and unemployed men spend the day watching game shows on, where the piss in the men's room smells 2,000 years old and there's always a sodden camel butt unraveling in the toilet bowl, where the beer is 30 cents a glass and you cut it with salt and the jukebox is loaded with 70 country oldies. How long? Oh Christ, he was so afraid it wouldn't be long at all. I can't win, he said very softly. That was it. It was like trying to play solitaire with one of the aces missing from the deck. Abruptly, he leaned over the Ski-Doo's motor compartment and yanked off the magneto. It came off with sickening ease. He looked at it for a moment, then went to the equipment shed's back door and opened it. From here, the view of the mountains was unobstructed, picture postcard beautiful in the twinkling brightness of morning. An unbroken field of snow rose to the first pines about a mile distant. He flung the magneto as far out into the snow as he could. It went much further than it should have. There was a light puff of snow when it fell. The light breeze carried the snow granules away to fresh resting places. Disperse there, I say. There's nothing to see. It's all over. Disperse. He felt at peace. He stood in the doorway for a long time, breathing the good mountain air, and then he closed it firmly and went back onto the other door to tell Wendy they would be staying. On the way, he stopped and had a snowball fight with Danny.